Hi, and welcome to the Did You Know Crypto podcast. I'm Dustin, your host. Today, I welcome Marco Peereboom to talk about Decred, a very, very cool project that seeks to build a better, more stable digital currency. And I first became aware of this in my interview with Murad Mammadov, and he mentioned Decred. He's a Bitcoin majoritarian, but Decred was pretty much the only other project that he was interested in. So I started to do more research, and I got really interested in it. And for the sake of transparency, I do actually own Decred now. I think you're going to find Decred's concepts and changes to the Bitcoin protocol and how they actually do things really intriguing, to say the least. Now, if you'd like to help the podcast, please go to iTunes, leave a 5-star and a written review. That's really the most important thing right now. It really, really helps. But if you'd like to do more, go to supportmypodcast.com. That's supportmypodcast.com to see all the ways that you can help, from shopping through my Amazon link to downloading the Brave browser, which is the most secure and privacy-oriented browser on the internet. But most of all, I'd like to thank you for listening and enjoy the show. Today, I'd like to welcome Marco Peereboom, hacker, Twitter foodie, Decred New Systems Development Lead, and CTO of Company Zero. Marco, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So we kind of talked about this on DM and Twitter a little bit, and you got tagged in that episode. But a month or so ago, when I had Murad Mammadov on, we kind of got into Bitcoin maximalism and everything like that, and he actually called himself, I believe the term he used was Bitcoin majoritarian. But he mentioned that there was one project outside of Bitcoin that he kind of passionately optimistic for, and that was Decred. So I'd heard about Decred before, and I'd read a little bit about it, but kind of how it is in this space. There's so many different things to try to keep up with. Usually it's when people that that you have a high degree of respect for, start talking about something, is usually when your ears kind of go up. And that's kind of what caused me to do it. So I started to do some reading and started doing a little bit more deep diving on it. And, I wanted to talk to you about the project, but before we actually go into Decred, I was wondering if you want to talk about your background, kind of how did you get from wherever you were to, your lead-in was, hacker to, Bitcoin and now CTO of Company Zero.
So I'm actually a double E with a software problem. So I've never acted on my double E-ness, not really, only more for hobby stuff, and a little bit at Dell. I was there for many, many years. So I worked there and I held just about every engineering position there. And then at one point I decided that, it was time to do something different. And in a familiar name for folks that know Decred, so Jake Yoakum and I started a company, and it was called Conformal Systems. What we did there is we created a product called CipherTight. And it was an online secure backup solution. So it was very heavy on crypto. And, so that is how we got, where I really started working full time on a crypto product. So in my spare time, I always worked on an open source project called OpenBSD. And that was basically writing operating system code. And I did many, many things in there. So whenever I had an itch, I scratched it. So, and from there, CipherTight was crypto based. And from there, we rolled into Bitcoin-related stuff, and then eventually into Decred.
So, what is Decred exactly? I mean, I've like I said, I've started to do some research, and then as well as for just openness and transparency, I do actually own Decred now. But just for everybody that hasn't been exposed to it, doesn't have any idea what it is, if you could kind of give us the kind of deep overview of it, and then we'll kind of start to delve in on the more of the specifics here.
So I want to first mention that we are pretty familiar with Bitcoin, because we actually hacked out a Bitcoin implementation called BTCD Still very widely used, beautiful code base. And so when we did that, so when we started hacking on BTCD and we put it out there, it was not received with the enthusiasm we were expecting. So the lines had been drawn in the sand at that point, and apparently when we showed up with software that was not, quote unquote theirs, we rocked the boat a little bit. So as open source developers, we found it very puzzling. It's like, what's going on here, right? We are giving you a beautiful code base, and why are you guys not happy? So what we noticed there very early on was that there was some sort of resistance towards other other factions, if you will, that were developing in the space. So what happened there is that we decided that Bitcoin is gorgeous and beautiful, and we love it, but it needed an iteration. So we iterated on Bitcoin, and what we added to it is a governance layer. And with that governance layer, what we wanted to achieve is longevity. So invariably in the future, something is going to change, something is going to break, and you need to be able to deal with that. And with our governance layer, we are going to be able to deal with what Donald Rumsfeld called unknown unknowns. So we have a formal change mechanism and change process to deal with protocol and consensus changes.
So would you call, as far as for Decred's stated goal, because what Bitcoin's goal is, I guess it can kind of depend on exactly who you're talking to, whether it's someone from the kind of more maximalist BTC camp or the BSV crowd. It can have different things, but there's a stark difference between what Ethereum is trying to do, although they have started to change a little bit, and what Bitcoin is trying to do. So what is Decred's kind of mission statement, and what are they trying to accomplish?
So Decred is money. That is really the way we look at it. So it is a store of value. It's all the familiar words that people that talk Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are familiar with. That is what we are are trying to achieve is being decentralized money, actually, and hence the name Decred for decentralized credits. And as we all know, credits is money in in any science fiction book that you read.
And what's kind of the thesis of Decred as far as for? You state that you want to be money. Are you seeking as probably what the big blockers would be looking to do, which is to become a medium of exchange before store of value, or are you looking that Decred's first use case is store of value as well, or kind of a doing the same thing at the same time? I guess a hybrid mix of the two.
Well, so the thing is that what I want to caution here is that what I'm saying here is obviously my opinion. So the beauty of having a governance layer is that everybody gets to decide. So every stakeholder gets to decide where this is going in the future. So I see it as a store of value first, and then as a means of exchange. That is my point of view. But since the stakeholders have started voting on new things, we'll see what happens in the future. Right? We'll see where they guide the network.
Just to kind of dive right into that with the idea of stakeholders. So most people who are listening should be somewhat aware of the the concept of what the difference between proof of work and proof of stake. Decred's a hybrid of those two systems. So would you mind kind of going into what that hybrid is, why you guys decided to choose, or why Decred decided to use that hybrid system versus pure proof of work or pure proof of stake, and why you think that your system, the Decred system with the hybrid, is superior to just a purist on either side?
So I think it's pretty obvious from anybody who has written code that both proof of work and proof of stake have some I don't want to use the word vulnerability here, but they are weak in certain areas. So proof of work, for example, can very easily be forked. Proof of stake can easily be manipulated. So they are not good solutions for the problem. So this is a little bit controversial. I understand that because some folks, call proof of fork splitting governance, and so opinions are divided on that, and I recognize that. But what we were trying to achieve is to make a coin that is fork resistant, so that once a vote is taken, that you not necessarily splinter the community. So, and because there is a formal way of doing this, so you as a stakeholder get to vote on what happens next, and therefore hoping that the psychology remains in a place that, okay, I lost the vote, but I still like the project, right? Something along those lines. So that being fork resistant, it also does mean that it would be exceedingly hard to actually fork the project, or sorry, the blockchain, and then start doing different things there. So that's what we're trying to do here, right? So we're just trying to be accommodating for the stakeholders, and and provide them so give them a means to have input into what happens next.
Yeah, I once Murad kind of was talking about how it functioned. I was very much intrigued because the 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 concept of, because you guys, just to make sure that I have this correct as well, that you still have proof of work miners that operate just like they would on Bitcoin, correct? But then you also have a stakeholder system that gets to decide, they vote with their stake, what happens on the system. So there's no way for someone on the proof of work side to just fork off. It's actually the stakeholders who get to decide. Are they deciding everything? Are they deciding what code gets merged, like in GitHub and those types of things? Is it
Um, Yeah, so let's first of all dive a little bit deeper into proof of work and proof of stake hybridization. So the way it works in Decred is, first of all, we actually split the block reward between the proof of work, proof of stake guys, and the treasury. So the proof of work guys get 60%, the proof of stake guys get 30%, and the remaining 10% goes to the treasury. So that is enforced by consensus. So, and the reason the miners get the largest piece of the pie is because they are expending real energy, right? So they have some real costs they need to cover. So we recognize that they needed to get the biggest piece of the pie because they are moving the most amount of work. So that said, the proof of stake guys have, let's call it, veto power over the proof of work miners. So if proof of work miners start misbehaving, the stakeholders can prevent certain things from happening. So, for example, if a miner starts mining empty blocks, we can, or the stakeholders can start voting down the blocks from that miner, saying, this guy is misbehaving. We no longer want to accept his blocks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes you guys resistant to something that I've been kind of interested in, like Shark Pool, where they actually purposely go to mine empty blocks on chains to attack that specific proof of work chain.
Right. So, and we would be very resistant to that because obviously the stakeholders aren't going to put up with that. They're going to say, "Yeah, no, nice try. We don't like you. Go away. You're not a good citizen in the system." So, also that said, so every block actually has 5 votes on it, and we have a permanent agenda, which is the one that determines if the prior block was valid. So if a miner if a miner mines a block, it actually has to call what we call the votes, right? And those votes are recorded on the blockchain. So if there are active agendas to actually change consensus or protocol, you can vote on that. But there's always the permanent one that says, was the prior block valid? And with that, we can slap miners, on the hand saying, stop being a bad boy. So we strip them of their awards. Turns out they don't love that. So, and it also, we spent actually, when we were developing Decred, we spent a lot of time on incentive design. So we really tried to make sure that that everybody gets a fair shake at this, and if somebody is misbehaving, that they're going to be quote unquote punished for it. So, for example, if a miner decides to only record 3 votes, they're only going to get 3/5 of the reward of the block. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you only get your full reward if you have the 5 votes on your block. So and with that, you create, let's call it a set of desirable behavior. And so far so good, miners have been trying to behave that way because they like money.
So with the proof of stake and the stakeholders, how does that exactly work? You're looking in the wallet right now. If I go into the Decred wallet, to be able to stake your coins and be able to vote on proposals and all those sorts of things, you have to buy a ticket. So if you could explain that process, exactly does that work?
So the idea here is that in order to be a stakeholder, you have to purchase a ticket, which gives you the privilege to vote. That is the idea here. So, and the idea of the ticket purchase is really to tie up your money for the duration of your vote. So voting is gamified, and that means that you don't know when you're going to be called, but when you are called, you need to react very, very quickly with your vote so that you can, get your stake reward. So, with that said, where was I going with this? So when you purchase a ticket, you actually spend, so that this time point in time is about 107 Decred. So you tie up the 107 Decred for the duration. So on average, a vote takes 28 days. So let's roll with that. So you tie up your 107 Decred for 28 days up until your vote, and then once it comes through, then you get refunded your ticket purchase price plus a portion of the block reward. And the way that block reward works, if you remember from the prior section, was that the stakeholders get 30%. So there are five votes per block. So that means you get 1/5 of the 30% from the block reward. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And so basically, if I get this right, you don't quite know, like, what's the, so you purchase a ticket and then you don't quite know when you're actually going to be called for this. Is there some way to warn you of this, or do you just have to kind of monitor your wallet?
So actually, you have to be online and react within milliseconds, actually. So when I mean fast, I mean fast. So the reason it's that fast and required to be that fast is that so the proof of work guys underneath it are ferociously working on mining these blocks, right? So they need to put that block out as quickly as they mine it, essentially. So therefore, it's got to be very, very quick. So we understand that not everybody has the technical know-how, or even the network capacity to have a machine online 24 hours a day and all that kind of good stuff, redundant, right? Because you don't want to lose the vote and all that kind of good stuff. So what we have is VSPs or VPSs. What is it? Virtual vote providers, or I even forget the acronym. But basically, these are people that are online 24 hours a day, and they vote for you by proxy. So you give them a portion of your block rewards to them for the service, and then you don't have to maintain any any infrastructure. And a lot of folks use them because it's much easier to deal with.
And I imagine that in the future, there'll be infrastructure to be able to, monitor and do this all yourself, kind of push button in a way. But for right now, it kind of reminds me a little bit, if you remember the early days of eBay, when you'd put up an item for sale, someone would buy it. In the very, very early days of eBay, everyone thought, like, this is going to be rife with fraud and everything like that. Like, I'm going to send you $20 via check in the mail, or because that was even before PayPal, money order for a pair of boots, and you're never going to send it. I'm going to be out the money. This is going to be a huge fiasco. How's this going to work? So a bunch of middlemen kind of popped up as a service for a very, actually, crazily short period of time, that they would basically have the product sent to them. They would inspect it. They would have the money sent to them. They would verify that the money was there. And then if everything met both expectations, they would send it to the correct person. They would take, of course, a cut of the sale. But very quickly, as technology developed and as well as trust developed within the system, they were able to do it. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but it kind of reminds me that once the technology kind of develops to the point, you'll be able to, and the Decred team will be able to kind of automate this a lot easier for individuals. Although I imagine that these virtual vote providers are kind of they're not charging extraordinary sums. They're providing a service that obviously most people that are stakeholders are willing to pay for.
Well, it's actually really, really cheap. So most of them charge like 1% of what you bring in. So but it's only of the portion of your block reward, right? So it's really a minimal amount, and I would venture to say that they're probably all losing money on providing the service. So no, but you're right though. So we want to keep these guys around. They have provided a very valuable service, and it is not going to be for everybody to have machines online 24 hours a day. we have debated ways to make it easier for people to have that. So the first version was all very, very manual, was very hard to do. So right now you can probably have voting infrastructure set up if you have a proper admin within a couple of hours. So, but we have been debating single push button solutions where you push a button, you select a cloud provider, and then a virtual machine is deployed that does the work for you. So we have been talking about that kind of stuff, but we have not made any formal plans to move into that direction. But in classical Decred fashion, we are going to do whatever we can to remove middlemen. We will always strive for that. So, and actually, a thing that we didn't mention at all, and if I may, so another thing that Decred has been working on is a thing called the DEX. I don't know if you heard about that proposal.
I read a little bit about it, yeah.
So what the DEX is by the way, do you know that we are the ones that originated the atomic swap code that everybody is using and talking about? That is actually code that came from the Decred project.
No,
So,
I did not. I did not know that. Just as a kind of a run in before we go into that. Some people may not understand. You don't need to go like into deep detail, but what exactly is an atomic swap, so that people kind of have an idea of kind of how important that is.
so actually, I think that atomic swaps are probably one of the most exciting things that have happened in the last 2 years in the virtual currency space. So what atomic swaps are is the ability to trustless, without escrow, exchange value between two blockchains, so two different blockchains. And the very first one that was executed that I'm aware of was Decred to Litecoin. So one of our developers in Charlie Lee, they exchanged Litecoin for Decred. And that was obviously very exciting. And actually, honestly, I think that people should be dancing naked out in the streets because this removes the need for the exchange middleman. So obviously, with some caveats, right? Because it's not as fast as a solution like I don't know, Cryptopia that you mentioned earlier. So, but Cryptopia, you do have to. They are the custodians of your if your cryptocurrency, and they have been hacked recently, and they're still trying to come back. So, but with atomic swaps, you and I can decide on a price, and then we can execute it. And again, permissionless, so nobody can stop us from doing this. Trustless. I mean, I don't have to trust you. So if any part of the agreement is incorrect, it's going to not go through. So if everybody executes everything right, then there is a atomic swap, as in it is non-reversible and it happens on both ends, on both blockchains. So in other words, we could exchange Decred and Bitcoin right now without any middleman. So and with that building block, we have been thinking about so how do we bring this to the masses? Because it's pretty technical right now. It's a command line utility. It's hard to use, but it's super cool. So we have been working on an idea on basically creating a decentralized exchange where there is a order book and therefore price discovery, and then people can basically say, "Hey, I want to sell this Decred for that amount of Bitcoin," and then they put it up. And if somebody is interested, then they can pick up that order, or they can pick up that order and then execute it. Does that make sense?
No, yes, definitely.
So, and what that will do is it will basically it does a couple of things because it is atomic swaps. It's slow, and people might say, "Oh, that's not good." No, that is great because it actually also destroys the whole high frequency trading, which is detrimental to any system. So, and you can exchange at your leisure, with other folks, and so I think that is going to be very exciting for the virtual currency space because people will be able to get rid of one more of those middlemen.
I've always been kind of fascinated with the concept of the decentralized exchange. Bit shares and all that kind of stuff was kind of interesting to me. Although that's kind of fallen flat, but I don't know. Dan Larimer's projects seem to kind of do that.
Yeah, well, so actually the thing to realize there, and so the thing that we are doing differently is that this is atomic swaps and not with a token in the middle, right?
Yeah.
There is no, there's no Ripple in the middle. There's no 0x, right? There's no, that's the entire point, right?
Yeah.
Because if you have a token in the middle, you are not decentralized. You are just another middleman, because your token now has value and it needs to be monetized. And the Decred DEX is going to be not monetizable. That's actually the point.
And when do you guys feel like that's going to be? I mean, obviously it's going to be a little bit in the future, but when do you feel that that's going to start getting kind of launched into beta?
That's really hard to say. So all
Yeah.
this stuff is really hard, and we move at development speed and not at you know uh, expectation speed.
No, absolutely. I don't think. I think that this space is so rife with over promises and
Yep. So hurry up and
under
wait.
delivery.
Yeah. And again, what I got to say to that is hurry up and wait.
With the treasury system, the kind of you mentioned that 60% goes to the miners, 30% goes to the stakeholders, and then I wanted to go over the stakeholders here in just a minute. But with the treasury system, I've always kind of been intrigued by this concept because it's a DAO, correct? A decentralized autonomous organization.
No,
It's
not
not
quite
okay.
yet. We're working very hard to get there.
Okay,
So I can go into a lot of detail there because I'm actually actively working on that proposal to put out there so that people can see what our next step is going to be in that direction.
so actually, if you want to, why don't you explain how the treasury system works right now, the 10% reward, how that works currently, and then why don't you go into your proposal, how you envision this to work in the future?
Okay, so first I think we need to make sure that we explain what governance means. So there's really two pillars of governance in blockchain projects. So one of them is for consensus and protocol changes. So that's basically a vote to change the rules. And then there's votes that are meant to do some signaling or treasury disbursements. So we got to make sure that when your listeners are when we go through this conversation that we differentiate between voting for consensus and voting for treasury spends. So because those are two different things, even though they leverage a lot of the same voting infrastructure, they are different things, and they have different incentive structures. So for example, voting on treasury spends does not reward you. So that's what you do in order to propel the network forward, and see what happens next. So you only get rewarded for voting on the blockchain. Does that make sense? So we just got to keep these two things apart and make sure that the listeners know which one we're talking about.
No, that makes sense.
So that said, the way the treasury currently works is, as you mentioned, 10% of the block reward goes to this treasury. It's actually baked into consensus, and it goes to this one address, and it just has been sitting there accumulating. And we have accumulated a lot of Decred over the last couple of years. Because we are pretty frugal, so we have never had giant boat parties and wasted all our money. So with that, we have basically a pile of money to use for development and travel and conferences and sponsorships, whatever we want to do with it. It's just sitting there, and we can spend that. So the way you get to spend that as an outsider is you write a proposal in our, on our website called Politeia. So it's actually proposals.decred.org for the folks that want to go look at it. And there's actually a couple of active proposals right there right now. So, but what you do there is that you basically write a mini business plan. You say, I am going to do this work, and I estimate it's going to cost this amount of, money, actual money. And then that gets translated then into Decred. So you can literally show up with a good idea and get paid for doing work on, for Decred.
And so this is kind of very similar to at least the concept of the dash.
Somewhat. So,
Yeah.
so Dash pays up front, and it's very expensive to do a proposal. Decred is very cheap to do a proposal, and it's paid arrears. So you got to do some work first before you're going to start getting paid. So
Maybe I was not aware because I've never done a dash proposal, but you're saying that you actually have to the person proposing actually has to pay up front, or
so in order to create a proposal, you have to actually put up some Dash.
oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
so that
Okay.
there's that, and then but also the payments then become quote unquote automatic, right? Unless they get defunded for whatever reason. So, but if somebody gets a proposal through and they would not do any work on it, and then that dash would have disappeared. At least that last time I looked, that's how it worked. So it could have changed at this point. So I don't want to rag on them. I think that they have a great project
Okay.
as well. But that's the depth of my knowledge of how they are doing things.
Yeah, with Dash is that they kind of really built up quite a bit of infrastructure and a permanent team that kind of operates almost as if a company. I mean, granted, it is at the discretion of the voters on the system whether or not that continues. But I remember reading, kind of in the depths of the bear market, in 2018, that I remember there was talk of if Dash hit a certain point that they wouldn't be able to stay solvent any longer with the team or the company, whatever you want to call it, that was operating at that time. Is there kind of a similar? I know you guys said that you guys are much more frugal, but is there a similar friction point with the permanent, team and developers that are working on there, where if Decred falls to a certain point, it'll become difficult or unable to continue to fund the current level?
So actually, the other day there was a article that came out where apparently Dash has started laying off quite a bit of their workforce because they are having solvency issues, which is a shame, but that's happening there. So and that is really the last thing I'm going to say about Dash here. But so what Decred has done and always has done is that we have always been trying to use Decred to pay for development and in other expenses, like going to conferences and that kind of stuff. And before we ever went to any one of those things, we did spend quite a bit of time vetting them, making sure that it was a good bang for the buck. And we never really started spending more once the bull market appeared. We just stayed pretty much the same, pretty level on the amount of expenditures. So developers come and go, right? That's inherent to the open source system. So the costs that we had in 2016 are not very different from the costs that we have in 2018 or in 2017. And at the current pricing, Decred can go on indefinitely. So and only if we lose another 50% is when we at that point we start digging into the treasury. And the treasury has quite a bit of Decred in it. So so does that somewhat answer your question? So we are so at this point we're still accumulating every month at the current price levels. And only if we drop another 50% is when we are not accumulating. And if we drop below that is when we actually start digging into the into the reserves.
No, okay, I understand. You kind of went over this as well a little bit already when you're talking about your proposal for how the DAO would function. But I know that in the future with the proposals, from what I was reading, and when I was kind of doing a little bit, obviously a little bit more research into how it's going to be working, is that so if I made the proposal right, and the proposal got approved, that would create what you guys call a decentralized autonomous entity, correct?
So
And
again, we
then
are not quite there yet.
yeah, I meant I was just trying to get into how you expect that to work um, in accordance with the DAO, and the kind of the steps of the evolution that would need to become kind of more automatic
Right.
with the
Well,
DAU.
so currently at the end of a vote, there is a person that actually does the treasury spends, right? So people wrote a proposal, stuff worked. So there's somebody actually auditing the work, and then at the end of the day, sends that other entity Decred. Does that make sense? So we are
Yes. Yeah.
actually we have a corporation for that. It's called the DHG, the Decred Holding Group, and their entire point uh, is to be that guy at the end of the line. So that is obviously very undesirable because there's a person that has access to that, uh, and we don't want that, right? For multiple reasons, right? So we don't want that person to be coerced. We don't want that person to leave. So we very much wants to move on from that and start moving the system to a fully automated system. So that said, we also are pretty realistic that this is a hard problem to solve, and will take some time, and probably will take several steps before we are, you know, before we are comfortable releasing the entire treasury fund, because the treasury fund right now is, I think, is sitting at about $20 million. So that's quite a significant amount of cash that we just don't want to, put at risk.
No, definitely not, and especially now, when we're kind of in a depressed market, it's not something that you want to be doing at the moment either. But no, I really admired the fact that you guys, when I was reading more about the project, that you kind of kept your heads down in 2017 and just kind of kept on going. And like you said, you weren't throwing big parties with Snoop Dogg, and not that every single project did that, but it was kind of ubiquitous for a period to kind of see this excess.
Well, I
But
went to those parties, but I wasn't paying
yeah,
for those parties. No, but we
no,
also felt that, honestly, we felt that we did not have enough work done in order to act out. And that's actually one of the things that we actually get criticized for, is why are you guys not out there doing all these extra things that everybody else is doing? Is, well, we honestly didn't feel that we were ready to have the whole world show up. So there was still code to be written, so that we could handle an influx and deal with again, with the unknown unknowns right at a time.
Hey folks, I hope that you're enjoying this episode as much as we are. I don't have any sponsors, so if you could go over to supportmypodcast.com, you'll see all the different ways that you can support the podcast, from Amazon links to a bunch of other stuff. You could back us on Bitback or with crypto, but most of all, if you can go to iTunes and leave a 5-star and a written review, it'd be very, very helpful. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the show. And I guess I kind of forgot at the very beginning to ask just kind of the basics of Decred. Like, what is the what is the transaction times? Rough transaction costs. How often does a block produce? That kind of stuff. That kind of would let people know, using that as a money, how. And this kind of leads into another question, but just on the base layer, how fast is it, and how easy is it to spend that?
So it's 5 minutes instead of 10, compared to Bitcoin, and then the rest is pretty much the same. So our transaction fees are actually relatively low. Man, I never know the number. So we actually lowered an order of magnitude actually not that long ago. So it's relatively cheap to send Decred, and it's every 5 minutes. And obviously we are working on solutions to increase that speed, if you will, just the transaction speed, not the blocks. The blocks are going to remain static as they are.
And if Decred, let's just say, started to receive the same volume that Bitcoin did, back, what was it, late summer, fall of 2017, would you be experiencing the same level of fees to do on-chain transactions?
So the market would dictate that would be true. But in our case, we would have because we have our governance layer, we could actually do something about it. So at that point, we could come up with solutions to that problem. And, something can range from making the block bigger to increasing block frequency, just making this up. Right, so we have options here. So when something bad like that happens, we can start working on solutions to make that go away. Whereas in Bitcoin, they just had to sit it out, right?
Yeah, and argue as well till you got to a point where people decided to fork off, right, and decide go their separate ways. I talked about Murad about a little bit about that. Is that I do kind of I like, as far as for continuity of the chain, I like this idea of that it's fork resistant. I do kind of like philosophically the idea of a fork, because the fork allows people, and I know people could if they really wanted to. If they could just copy the code base and create their own Decred.
Well, that would not be the same blockchain, though. Sure, and
Yeah,
Hcash has done that, right? They have taken our code and tragically enough, they have removed actually our copyrights from most of it, which is the real tragedy here. I mean, if you take your code, at least say thank you, right? But forking the code is not the same as forking the chain.
Yeah, no, of course. But like the idea of forking, though, I've always, philosophically liked it, is just kind of a thought experiment on how to approach disagreements, not just in, blockchains, but as society as a whole. This idea of being able to go your own separate ways, basically in a peaceful manner, and letting the market dictate
Well, also, but
who has the better idea.
while I philosophically agree with what you just said there, I think that reality has shown to be a little bit different there, right? So when Bitcoin Cash happened, it was pretty acrimonious. Yeah, I cannot pronounce that word. Um, but yeah,
Acrimonious?
that was the word I was trying to pronounce. Sorry, my Dutchness is not allowing me to pronounce that word.
No, that's fine.
But that created a lot of unease, and it created a lot of you know confused people. Folks did not understand what was going on. So even though I agree with I no, let me rephrase that. I understand why Roger said, you know what, I'm going to go create my own sandbox. Screw this noise. I'm going home, right? So I get that part. I completely understand. But then the fact that he went on and started to marketing, doing marketing pushes to say Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin, and then confusing people that they thought they were buying Bitcoin, but they were really buying Bitcoin Cash. So I thought that was very disingenuous, and I think that actually hurt the cryptocurrency space overall. Hurt the cryptocurrency space. I don't think that was a healthy, a healthy outcome. So again, I kind of see it both ways here.
And going back to the discussion of transaction fees, is that I thought I'd read somewhere that Decred already kind of has a second layer Lightning network already. Is that true?
So that is not completely true. We have been working on Lightning for quite a while, and we have not delivered it yet. It's a bit of a black eye, actually, because it was supposed to be done quite a while back, but it turned out to be a bit more challenging. So what we try to accomplish there is to take the Lightning network as it exists, written by Lightning Labs, and only create kind of a middleware layer, if you will, that translates between Bitcoin and Decred. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
yeah. So in other words, you can keep most of the code, like 99 or 98% of it, the same, and then you only have this one touch point where you have to maintain all the changes. So you keep all the network topology stuff, right, which is really hard to get right. So but like I said, that has been a bit of a bear to wrestle to the ground. We in fact actually have made several changes to consensus in order to enable all the functionality needed to do Lightning. So it's not for a lack of not wanting it. It's just been a bit of a tough slog, but something will happen in the future out there.
No, and just the whole world of second layer is just so early, and it's just I think that as a community, and especially the longer that you've been involved in this, I have a major issue of it too, is kind of having a lack of patience of going like, okay, especially I'm kind of going on. I've been aware of Bitcoin for 7 years. I've not been, insanely, passionate about it for 7 years. It took me a while to really kind of understand it, right?
Right.
But where you kind of go like, it's been years, like, and you kind of go like, this should have happened by now. And also, but on the flip side, you need to realize that we're not talking about, creating the next app that's going to overtake Snapchat. We're talking about, a revolution that's going to be upsetting basically thousands of years of the concept of what money is and how it works. A lot of the foundations and fundamentals are the same, or not foundations, but the fundamentals of money are the same, right? But the way that we look at it and the way that it affects society and the way that we actually use it and have power over it as individuals versus it being given to us by another authority, it is nothing short of amazing, kind of historically. And sometimes I have to stop and think to myself, this is this is not something that's going to, Rome wasn't built in a day, so to speak. And, we're not going to be able to do that. And with second layer as well, we've been talking about it and we're just barely into a year of testing of it. I do have some concerns about some of the aspects of it, but overall, I'm excited really to see anything that is going to make things cheaper and easier for people. But to roll in with to as far as for Decred and Bitcoin, right? And I had kind of shift gears into something I guess slightly controversial, but I had an interview with some folks from Lightning, or I had an interview with a gentleman not from Lightning, from Litecoin, and their kind of concept in Litecoin seems to be that they are kind of the sandbox and test bed for a lot of stuff that ends up going into Bitcoin, and they see themselves as complementary, not really as a competitor. How does Decred, view Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Do you see them as competitors, or what is the thought process? I understand you can't speak for the project as a whole, but I guess I'm more asking, where do you see specifically?
So I am a, so just like Murad said, I'm a, I'm not a maximalist. I do believe that there's going to be room for several. So, but I am a shitcoin minimalist though. So I think that a lot of these projects actually make no sense whatsoever, and it would be better for the space for them to just go away. But I recognize that people are going to try and experiment with things. But again, I think that overall a lot of this stuff is nonsense, and I think 10 years from now there's going to be a very small number of cryptocurrencies that exist today that will remain in existence. So I do think that Decred is going to be one of the very few, and again that the whole governance thing is what's going to buy us that longevity, right? Because we will be able to alter course and deal with whatever is thrown at us. So I honestly think that Decred is going to be one of the very few that's going to still be standing, decades from now.
Yeah, no. If you would ask me, it's kind of funny just seeing my own genesis on the subject. I've talked about this before, so I won't belabor it for people to listen. But I started back in 2013. I bought I made 2 6 GPU mining rigs, and I was mining Litecoin. And at that time also there was a bunch of alts, although people don't really call them altcoins anymore as much. But you would jump on these new altcoins as they would get released, and you dump them out on Cryptopia or whatever junk exchange was out there, and you trade it out for Bitcoin. But there was so much stuff out there. I wasn't really taking any. I was attracted to the politics of Bitcoin, but I started to even at that time start to get a little bit caught up in the I guess the bonanza of 2013 2014. We really kind of saw that pump, just like we saw in 2017. Even into 2017, I kind of had a very open mind's a bad way to describe it, but I was just kind of like, laissez-faire with the idea of like, well, whatever, and everything should be, is a valid coin and project, and if they fail, the market will determine it. And I've really started to shift quite severely, as I think you see quite a few people do, and I'm willing to admit I was really wrong on a lot of different projects that I've started to realize as I understand what blockchain really is, and that it's not the panacea to solving all the world's problems.
It's not
Um,
still not curing cancer.
no, and it's when I started to look at, well, it could do this and logistics and all this kind of stuff, and when I actually started to understand a lot better, actually nuts and bolts, what makes blockchain, or what makes Bitcoin as a blockchain important versus just a permission system per se, within the corporate world, is it's a lot of ways it's a really inefficient ledger, but what really is what it's securing worth the amount of energy expended to secure it, right?
Sure.
So it depends on what kind of system you're running, but yeah, I've kind of started to move really heavily in that same direction that you're talking about, like a shitcoin minimalist.
Yeah. So
um
actually, I've had a. So let me. I mean, I've been in this space for literally since the dawn of time. So I'm familiar. I love it, right? But and I got to say, I was a bit of a cheerleader early on as well for certain things that were happening. Um, but I think that I've become a bit more of a cynic because it's been years and all these promises have not been kept. and there's been a lot of folks working on this stuff. So so either the hype cannot live up to the promises, or these people are not smart enough to solve some of these problems. So and I think that more folks have kind of matured on that. Um, so I mean, what Bitcoin did, right, is they created a means to exchange value without, permissionless, without all the parties. We all know the stories here, right? But what it actually solved was digital bearer bonds, right? So I can show up and hand you, coupons, and then those coupons have value, and then the recipient of those coupons can then do whatever they want with those coupons, right? So they are the holders of the value. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
That is
no,
the
exactly.
actual thing that blockchain solved, right? Distributed blockchain solved. And if you veer away from digital, you are it's kind of game over, right? So if you try to tie anything real world to digital bearer bonds, it may not make sense, right? So, for example, real estate on the blockchain. What does that mean? So, real estate already has a very well defined legal framework around it, and you can put whatever you want on the blockchain. That legal framework is not beholden to what's on that blockchain, right? So dealing in the real world means you're going to be dealing with local laws, and the end. It stops right there. So what is the point, right? So that is kind of where I have been heading with my thoughts on this, right? So it's got to be digital. If it is not digital, then it just makes not a lot of sense.
No, yeah, I've struggled with that because I was really attracted to the idea of, like, land titling, those sorts of things. But then you start to think of, like, how do you actually attach the two?
You don't,
Um,
right?
so, because, like, if I ended up somehow coming across your private key, and the same, I guess, works for Bitcoin as well. But excuse me, if I was able to gain title or gain possession of that digital title, do I now, even though you're living in that house right now, wherever you're at, do I now actually own that?
Sure.
Even though you're living there, you've lived there for 20 some odd years, but somehow I was able to gain title to that. How do you attach that? And then I started to have issues with that. I do kind of like the idea a little bit, but then it becomes like you don't really need a blockchain for that. You
Well,
just
again, you
need
already have the legal
a
framework for that, right?
yeah. No, like, I remember just buying the house when we did a few years ago, and just going like it was kind of ridiculous to me to go like, okay, we need to go through title and need to pay this company. It's not a lot, but it's like $400 or $500 or whatever it is to make sure nobody has a claim on it. It seems like, shouldn't that already be in a system pretty easily, and accessible? It's just, I think the issue is this: a lot of stuff isn't digitized, or it's digitized and not easily accessible,
Oh, I have
from county to county to county.
I think I'm a bit more
Um,
cynical on that. I think it's more a convenient money grab that is going to be very hard to break. So, so I don't. I honestly think that that's purely status quo, right? So if all these rent seekers need to be paid, and that's why figuring out if somebody has owns the title is one of those things. Like getting your transcripts from a university that should cost literally $0. Yet they charge hundreds of dollars
yeah.
for it, right? That is basically the status quo. The rent seekers, trying to fight as hard as they can to retain their claim on a piece of the pie. So, but that will not be solved with blockchain, though. Sorry.
No, no, and that's kind of one of those realities that it took me a while to, because I got caught up in it, and I'll readily admit that I did do that, and just like the journey of learning about Bitcoin, how this stuff really works, is always usually fraught with. Hopefully, you learn the lessons earlier rather than later. But I guess the important thing is to actually learn the lessons and put them into play. And I know that I don't want to keep you late, because I know that you've got other things that you need to be getting done tonight. Because we are recording in the evening. Most people probably be listening in the mornings and afternoons. But was there anything that you wanted to leave the listeners with about Decred? any parting, thoughts on it, and just why they should, check it out, why they should consider it to be, a good long-term investment, or a good long-term thing that they should be using for transfer of value.
Well, so actually, first off, I think I really would like to point out that 2019 is actually going to probably be one of the biggest uh, code-wise. So we have several very large changes coming up. Cannot disclose right now what they are, but I'm imploring your listeners to keep an eye on Decred, keep an eye on Twitter, and see what's happening. But there's some really large scale deployments that are going to happen with Decred. So there's a lot of excitement in the development community, because this is the stuff that we were working on when everybody was partying. So, and some of the stuff is now finally coming to fruition, and so we are excited as developers to see the baby grow up, if you will. So the one thing that I can talk about is the that I'm working on automating the treasury payments. So that is going to be a very interesting system where we are going to remove. We're actually at that point, once it's all done, we are actually going to dissolve the DHG, and we are going to donate the current treasury funds to the new treasury, which we have dubbed the DAE, because the DAO has a bit of a negative connotation. So we came up with decentralized autonomous entity. So that is one of the things that is going to happen. So there's a lot of coolness there, right? Because that means that the funds and that the project disburses are going to be decentralized, and the stakeholders actually get to decide who gets paid, right? So if you think that Company Zero, so the ones that the company that I work for that works full time on Decred, if you think that we suck, then you guys can actually vote us out, and I think that's exciting. I'm very excited to see how that is going to work itself out. So what else do I want to give you guys? So the wallet that we have developed, the Crediton, so that started out, and it was, and then people complained, and a guy on Reddit wrote a very ugly review on how terrible it was. And then, but we really took that to heart, and we've actually, we spend a lot of time massaging the wallet. And I would say that outside of something like I don't know, Exodus, we probably have the easiest to use wallet, and everything is integrated. So the voting, staking, voting on treasury spends, it's all built into the wallet. So, and it's relatively easy to use. So in addition to that, we also have lots and lots of documentation. Our community is very open, so folks should interact with the Decred project as they would, and they should, so that they can get questions answered, and then they get to the bottom of things. So those are just some of the things that I wanted to tell the folks about Decred. It's an exciting community. We are going to be around for a long time. So come say hi. And an additional thing. So I don't know if this comes on time, but Monday on the the Just Hodl It party. I want to say it's like at 6:30 or so is when it starts, and it's a not official South by Southwest, but it is during South by Southwest. We are going to have a whole bunch of local folks here in Austin that are going to show up and talk about their respective projects, and there are going to be some panels. And there's going to be folks like Jared Tate from Digibyte, Paul Snow from Factum. There's going to be some folks from Stellar. There's several more that are going to show up. So some large projects that are all local to Austin are going to be there. And we're going to have a fun couple of panels, talk about a couple of things, and then epic party afterwards. So if anybody wants to go to that, sign up, go to Eventbrite, and search for the Just Hodl It party. And I think I have said all the things I wanted to say.
And how can people reach you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
So me personally, Twitter is an easy way to get a hold of me. So it's Marco_Peereboom. Or you can email me. I'm easy to find on the internet. So if you go to decred.org, there are links at the bottom of the page that tell you, how to get to GitHub, how to get to Slack, although we have been migrating from Slack to Riot or Matrix. But that is the easiest way of getting a hold of people, is basically using, Matrix Riot or Riot Matrix. I don't even know what it's called.
All right. And I will, in the show notes, if you go to digiknowcrypto.com/episode or EP 26, you will see all the links to the various Twitter accounts that we've mentioned, as well as the decred.org site, and pretty much everything else that we've mentioned here. And once again, Marco, I really appreciate you coming on.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.